Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Inside the Investigation, where we have a very amazing guest, someone whom I love and adore and get to work with every day. But we are going to be talking about the Abigail Zwerner civil suit that just wrapped up. My colleague and friend, Markeisha Jackson, was in the courtroom every single day. How many days was it?
Oh my gosh. It was almost 2 weeks, a week and a half.
So 10?
So 10 days.
Weekends not counting?
Yeah, weekends not counted. Every day.
And that wears on you. People don't understand, not only is it wearing on, of course, the family and, everyone there that's supporting the team, but like to go in every day and have to find what's the most important out of hours and hours of, court proceedings to tell the public, that can be a little bit rough sometimes.
Yes, absolutely. And, we're on a lot, 4, 5, and 6. When you're doing a big case like this,
Right.
you're 4, 5, and 6 every day, 6:30, 10, and 11. My process was, okay, what's the most important and how do I tell a story with each of these hits? Not thinking that everyone's going to watch 4, 5, and 6 continuously, but telling the story building off of each hit is what really helped me. So 4 o'clock, I like to just focus on, okay, what happened in the morning, afternoon, that was big, that I can tease to, okay, well, this evening, this is what happened. I'll have more on that at 5 and 6. But it was a lot being in there and hearing such emotional testimony.
Absolutely. And the visuals that came out of this case really sent me, and the accessibility that you all had as reporters too.
That was a first for me.
I have covered a lot of criminal trials in Indiana. Here, I have never seen it where you can use the actual sound from people taking the stand. Did they give you guys copies of the evidence photos? Is that what that was, or were y'all just taking photos of
photos of the displays that were shown? And I think the flexibility that we had with that was because this was technically just the civil trial portion of things. So that sort of, I guess, even the playing field a little bit. But quite literally, I was so shocked. I would ask, like, are you guys sure we can? Yeah. Whatever.
Everything was open.
Everything was open. And I think that is what really helped paint the story and tell the story, like you said. Without that, it's just us telling you what we saw. But viewers got to see exactly what we were seeing, jurors were seeing, and really I hope they felt like they were right there getting the most up-to-date information, sincerely.
And so let's recap real quick before we start going into some of the evidence that came in trial. So this was January of 2023, correct?
January 6, 2023.
And I remember the day. You were not at Wavy yet.
I was not at Wavy yet.
I remember the day very vividly. And I just remember the shock finding out that it was a child 6 years old.
Yeah.
And that everyone was still trying to wrap their head around, how does a child with little hands and a little body get a gun and have enough strength to even pull a trigger on something like that? There was just so many questions surrounding how in the world, because I think we went back and we did the research. This was one of the youngest school shooters ever in history.
Yeah. And that was the one thing that really shocked me, because there were so many times during the trial that other people would, how does a child that tiny, that small, do such a thing? And I remember asking Chris Horn, our investigative reporter, one of them, what was that day like in the newsroom? Because quite literally, like I wasn't at Wavy yet, but hearing about that, that's like something, it's just unusual, to say the least. And that word, unusual, something that's never happened before, rare, that kept coming up in the entirety of the trial, the 9-10 days that I was there. Like it was a shock factor all around this case.
It was, one of those moments where you realize just how bad violence in schools has gotten and the accessibility for students to get guns into school buildings. I think up to that point, I had covered one other shooting in Newport News, but it was an older, what school was it? It was an older teenager that had brought the gun to school.
Yeah.
And I was, live out there for that. But yeah, just thinking about such a small child, when we got some of the details, we were like, what in the world? So you take us to that day, what you know about just that incident itself when it happened.
Yeah, I feel like I'm an expert now at what happened that day.
You definitely are. That's why I was like, let me talk to her.
Literally. So, I mean, in that courtroom, they analyzed every piece, every minute of January 6, 2023, from the start of school until what happened and obviously the end of that school day. And starts off normal. Miss Zwerner, she was this child's teacher, had him in class this was January. So they were just fresh off of winter breaks, getting back to the swing of things. And she, of course, she's had him. She's observed his behavior and things like that. She just noticed the kid was a little, maybe more fidgety, maybe more irritated and things like that. And she mentioned briefly to the principal, former assistant principal, Ebony Parker, that I think, such and such he's in a bad kind of mood today. So that was the first thing that they centered on. It's like, okay, this is Miss Zwerner's first inkling that something's off today. Obviously, at that point, no one's thinking what could have happened would have happened, but they're thinking like, okay, well, kid's just in a bad mood. Again, they know this child, so they're just going on about the day. So that was the only time that Miss Zwerner mentioned it to a former assistant principal Parker that this kid was having some kind of issue that day, a behavior issue. That was the only communication that Zwerner and Parker really had about the child.
Okay.
Just them two, not other staff members hopping in and things like that.
Right.
So from there, that was probably, if I believe and remember correctly, that was in the morning that day. Then at recess is sort of when things, I would say, took a turn. That's when one of the reading specialists at the school, who also took the stand in this trial, and I would say probably had the most, I won't say the most emotional, but the most compelling testimony, because
you always remember those too.
Yes, like she really had the most compelling testimony because she also had worked alongside this child. It seemed like her and the child had a really good relationship because she said, she noticed him, maybe acting out a little and said, have a good day for me, be good for me. And the kid's like, okay, I will. And then they go to recess, and while at recess, another kid comes back in and says, like, such and such, I think maybe has a weapon. They were saying they had something, and if I tell anybody, they're going to hurt me. And so that's when that reading specialist decides to go check the student's book bag. Nothing's in there, but you got to remember, they just were at recess. So could that weapon or whatever it was, or what they thought it was at the time, have been moved from the book bag to the child's person?
Yep.
So that's when that reading specialist and Mrs. Zwerner, they talk about that. And that's when she searches the book bag, doesn't find anything. But that reading specialist says, I'm going to go tell former assistant principal Parker, this is what I know. Maybe we should do a search or whatever. Kids come back from recess. The day's moving on.
And what was Parker's reaction?
Parker's reaction to that second conversation, if we check the book bag, we should do a search of the kid himself or themselves, was like, it's almost the end of the day. We can just wait till mom gets here. Yeah, just let him go home. It was a Friday afternoon, so it was very much just like, okay, it's almost the end of the day.
I don't want to deal with it.
Yep, you looked in the book bag, you didn't find it. Okay, let's just wait and do this in a little bit. So, and so many things are just split moment like that. And so literally verbatim, exactly almost what that reading specialist says is after that, it's like 1:40-ish, she hears the gunshot, and her first thought is like, oh my gosh.
She knew.
She knew. She was like, oh my gosh, he shot her. Like she knew. And she said she was actually the first person to run to the classroom and saw the child, saw Miss Zwerner, helped usher those kids that were still in the classroom to safety. And we were actually shown the video of exactly right after that shooting. And you could see the little children run from one classroom to the next classroom, and just the fear in everybody's faces. And you see the reading specialist, she runs in, checks on Miss Zwerner and everything. And then in the next instant is when we see the body camera footage. First responders are coming in. You see the shots of Zwerner laid out on the stretcher. There's lots of blood. It's very a gory scene, to say the least. Right. And even in those videos, we see former assistant principal Parker. She's sort of just in her office. I would describe her appearance at that point as like shock. Almost like she was just
in disbelief.
In disbelief. Like,
so, okay. Yeah. So hold that thought. We're going to be right back. We're going to take a quick little break, and we're going to finish talking about, at this point after the shooting, the immediate reaction. All right, we are back now again with Markeisha Jackson. We are just now starting to talk about the response. Once teacher Abigail Zwerner was shot, the students are ushered into a different classroom. The first responders are coming in. This is all seen on body cam.
Yes.
Where is the little boy at that point, the shooter?
At that point, so we never saw the shooter in any of the video or anything that we were shown.
Was
we were
he
only
blurred,
told,
or
he was not shown in anything they showed us. But what we were told was that he was in. So the school camera that we viewed, the kids run out. It only showed the hallway. At that point, that student was still inside the classroom that they just ran out, being constrained by another staff member. So we never actually saw him, but he was in the classroom being constrained. But what we did see were those images. I believe for the first time anyone had saw them.
The gun in the classroom.
The gun in the classroom, right by the desk, right by a book bag. I mean, just your everyday
It looks
first
so
grade
unreal.
classroom. And it's just, you see this large firearm just on the floor.
Did they talk about how many bullets were left in that gun?
We didn't get into the details of how many were left in there. Just in research that I did, I believe that there was 8 in total, and he only fired the one round. So, and that of course leads into the criminal trial for the former assistant principal that we'll talk about. But I mean, when you think about that, a lot of times, of course, the plaintiff, Zwerner and her team, they focus on, I mean, yes, she got shot, which is tragic, but this could have been even more of a catastrophe.
He could have, like, so at that point, I remember seeing also the body camera footage of her with her shirt up, the blood coming on her chest.
Yeah.
I believe it was like they kind of illustrated it like she was like this, like she had a second to kind of like brace herself. Thus the bullet went through her hand into her chest, and it's still there.
Yes, definitely still there. And that was a big point and big whole portion really of the testimony for Abby herself when she took the stand. Doctors, they had a plethora of medical doctors who came to assess her, some of her doctors, others experts, and we spent a lot of time on the hand, and you could even see some of the discoloration and the...
What was their point in bringing all these medical experts to say she's going to deal with these injuries for life? Like, what do you think the purpose was on behalf of the lawyers to do that?
That precisely, to show that this is something that experts, longtime medical professionals who have, one of them compared to what he saw in Abby's hand as like a war crime. People who have seen a lot, done a lot, who are telling you that what happened to Miss Zwerner on January 6, 2023, it's going to linger with her the rest of her life, just physically from the injury itself. Like you said, I mean, the bullet, they said, narrowly missed her heart. They still can't retrieve that other one because surgery, it's close to a very main artery, and the risk of something going wrong, they don't want to take that risk. So she is literally, and in courtroom and court trials like this, they provide lunch every day for the teams and everything. And a lot of the times it was like sandwich and chips. They mentioned how Abby would have to ask one of her lawyers to open her chips because she just doesn't have that same function or grip strength. So they honed in on that a lot.
So with the bullet still being in her chest, did they talk about complications she could face down the road with not being able to remove that? Like, is lead poisoning, like, is that a thing? Do people still, I don't know.
They focused on that a lot. And the main thing was like, let's say, she had cancer or something that would require them to go in there, open something up. They almost would not be able, the risk is going to be extremely high, or they aren't going to be able to treat it in that way. And that could lead to other complications. So like they said, if she was to get hurt in the same place again, her odds of having a normal recovery or even normal surgery are almost slim to none from what the medical experts and her doctors were sharing. So that was I thought that was very compelling too, because, when you see this, you think, oh my gosh, she did not pass away. Still tragic,
okay,
but she
lived. But you're living with not only the mental trauma, but all these physical scars that will stay with you the rest of your life.
Literally.
Talk to me about what we know as far as the child's intent, right? Of course, it's the child. They don't know up from down half the time, and they certainly aren't fully aware enough to, necessarily have any criminal intent. But there was a lot of anger in this child. And what do you know about what was said the moments before he pulled the trigger and after?
Yeah, that was another thing. Of course, when in this situation, they've analyzed this child thoroughly. And like I said at the beginning of this episode, I mean, Ms. Zwerner noticed the child was in sort of an irritated, just not kind of having it kind of mood. And you think 6 years old, what kind of emotions is this child feeling? They did mention in the proceedings how Ms. Zwerner and the child had a previous run-in situation where somehow he got her phone in his hand and threw it on the ground, slammed it on the ground, broke it. And the kid actually was out of school for a couple of days because of that. Suspended, and had just actually returned when this shooting happened. So that was the extent of anything that the child and Miss Zwerner may have had, relationship-wise, the kind of relationship they had. And then they mentioned, just the behavior of the child. The child was on a very strategic, personalized plan school-wise. Up until this point, I believe it was shared that the child's parents, either both or one, had to be present with him in the classroom. And this was around like the first week where they had lifted that. We're going to try a new approach for him. And then this happened. So just from that alone, you could tell that there was some behavioral issues there, I would say. We didn't, in this trial, talk too much about the kind of home life that the child had. But like you said, this was a huge story in 2023 and even now. So you look back and you do research like I did just to do my due diligence and make sure I had a full scope of everything. The child's home life wasn't the best at the time when all this was going on. There were other things that were happening there. And when you said what they said after they fired, the child, according to that reading specialist, said, I shot.
And use the B word, right?
The B word. I shot this bee dead. 6 years old.
6 years old.
6 years old.
And that's learned behavior.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And we'll talk about here in just a minute after we come back from break. Did they address the gun accessibility, how the child was able to access the gun, whose gun it was? So we'll dig into that.
Yeah, we'll dig into that a little bit more too.
All right. We'll be right back. All right, thanks for staying with us as we talk about the Abby Zwerner civil trial, where Markeisha Jackson, my colleague, and the court reporter for that entire case. You were in there every single day. So at this point, we're kind of talking about the child and the intent, right? And you said that he made a very threatening statement after, he fired that gun. So we then, over the past 2 years, we've learned about his home life. Mom spent time in jail. Is she still in jail?
Yes.
So mom's still in jail for drug-related charges, correct?
I believe she's still in there for her connection with this, I believe. And I know a big thing that they talked about.
But I think it was something about her drug testing.
Yes, I was just about to say that. Her drug testing, she had failed multiple drug tests in the span of all this going on. Right. So yes, that as well. So,
and was it her gun?
Yes, it was mom's gun that was, for the lack of better terms, I guess, just sitting at home. She says it was on top of her dresser. She usually puts it up, but in an accessible place, in mom's room, not in a safe, not in some, stored very well placed. Or you have to put in a code or a key, open, whether that's on the dresser, outside of the purse that's on the dresser. It was accessible. Yeah.
Were you surprised that Ebony Parker did not take the stand?
I was not surprised, and only because if there was not the criminal trial that is to come November 17th, I could see her taking the stand in the civil. But knowing that she still has the criminal trial, I was like, okay, she's not going to take the stand. Zwerner's team, at one point, I felt almost, I thought at this point maybe she could, because they were saying how, the defense only called 2 witnesses. And they were both experts, an expert medical witness and an expert education witness. And the plaintiff's Zwerner's team, they call, the staff members, the doctors.
And then they get to cross-examine too.
Yeah, cross-examine too. And they only, the defense only calling up to 2 witnesses was something that in closing, Zwerner's team honed in on, saying how if you think people believe your take to this, that, Miss Parker was given, wrong information or information that wouldn't have prompted a quicker response, they literally said, bring them in and march them up to the witness stand, or have her, Miss Parker, take the witness stand. So at that point, I was like, okay, they're sort of putting the heat on, maybe see if she's gonna take the stand, but no, never took the stand. Very quiet in the courtroom.
Did she ever cry? Did she ever put her head down? Did you ever notice?
Yeah, at some point she would put her head down, but no, I didn't see any tears. It never seemed like overly emotional, kept a very stoic, straight face throughout everything. Very, very quiet.
What about the jury? Was there a moment where you remember the jury kind of like taking a breath or
Definitely, I would say when the body cam footage was shown, you could, they give the jurors their notepads. I mean,
they just start scribbling.
The pen's going, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is something that's compelling to them, and it was for me just sitting in there. It was compelling to me because you got to see truly what was going on inside of that school at that moment, and it was just so. I can't imagine what it felt like for anybody there, like chaos almost, to say the least.
What about Abby? What was the hardest part for her to get through when she was testifying?
I definitely would say, and this is a part, they actually had her step outside when some of the body cam footage was shown of her on the stretcher. So I believe that was very hard. That would have been very hard for her to see right there and there. And it was hard when she even was telling the juror and, you know, everybody that was in the room what was happening. You could tell.
Say, I thought I was dead, or I thought I was dying.
Yep, I thought I was dying and was on my way to heaven. And then another thing that I thought, because she was like, I thought I was dying on my way to heaven. And then I noticed everything was dark. And she was like, well, maybe I'm not going to heaven. And you could that's huge to hear somebody say that. Because, oh my gosh. Like in that moment.
Did she allude to being like religious at all?
Other than that, no. But I felt like from there, I was like, okay, I could understand what she was saying.
Have thought that she was going to hell.
Yeah, quite literally. When she said that, really stuck with me because I was like, oh my gosh, like on top of trying to process what just happened, having a thought like, oh my gosh, am I dying? And where am I going? Where am I going to spend eternity?
How have I lived my life?
Oh my,
you know?
Yes. And she was so young when it still is young.
Yeah.
Very young. And they honed in on that too, that she was really just starting her teaching career.
Definitely.
And now it's a career that she said she probably won't ever return to.
And I totally understand that one.
Me as well.
What do we know as far as where the child is now? What do we know about, you know, you mentioned that he was with Grandpa. We have talked to Grandpa before. Regina Mobley had a connection there somehow.
Yes.
What do we know about where the child is now and how they're making sure that he doesn't turn into a monster?
Yeah. So what we know now is that the child, like you said, is with Grandpa, is, according to Grandpa, doing much well. The last thing I read on it was that he's in a new school, thriving. He actually had just won like a Student of the Week, I believe, award it was.
Is he at another local public school?
They didn't get into the details. They just said he's at another school in the area. So I would take that to mean somewhere on the peninsula he is going to school. And according to Grandpa, doing much better. And all the stuff we did with Grandpa, Grandpa didn't shy away from the fact that his home life, you know, prior to this wasn't the best. So I think with this, it could be just as simple as a change of environment could maybe get this child back on the right track. And like you said, to ensure that they don't grow into a monster.
Well, you hope that they would put him into intensive therapy.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes, yes, yes.
And take me to, how much time do we have before we go to break? All right. We're going to get to this in a minute because I think it's going to take a little longer than 2 minutes. I want to talk about the moment the verdict came down. And then I do want to talk about, as far as, you know, sometimes it can be hard to keep family quiet in those situations. Were there any moments where the judge had to put the hammer down and say, quit mumbling, quit crying, quit, you know, talking?
Yes, yes, yes. So this was probably day 6 of the trial. So we're in the thick of testimony. And like you said, some of the stuff is shocking. So you see it, you know, people, wide eyes, gasp. The courtroom police officer told us, directive from the judge, that when we show these videos and things, we are not to see any gas or any outbursts, any sign of, you know, clear emotion. So that was said once. And then when it was time for the verdict to be read, the judge himself said, when this verdict is read, there is to be no outburst or anything like that, or you will be escorted out of this courtroom. So just that alone sets the stage of how emotional this was. And just, I mean, high emotions for everybody, both sides, I would say.
The first of its kind, you know. We've covered cases where there are criminal charges against parents because they left their gun on the counter, kid ends up getting the gun. You know, we've seen that. We've seen prosecutors hold parents accountable for, you know, not putting their gun in the right place. But this was the first time we had seen the school. Like you can no longer say, oh, well, as a teacher, you just kind of take that accountability. If you get shot, you get shot. That's part of the risk of teaching. And everyone's like,
no,
that's not what I signed up for.
I didn't sign up for this.
It shouldn't be something that, especially when there were warning signs, right?
Yes.
So we are going to talk about that moment when the verdict came down, and we will be right back after this quick break. All right, and we're wrapping up this episode of Inside the Investigation. Thank you so much, Markeisha, for all your insight. I think it's always so fascinating to me because there's so many details in the courtroom that you just don't have time to share when you're stuck to a minute and a half.
Yes.
So
So hard.
Take me to the moment where the verdict was read. First, let me know where your mindset was after hearing all of this. If you were a juror, where would you have fallen? And then what was the reaction when the verdict came down?
Oh my gosh. So the first thing is that Zwerner's team, they were asking for $40 million in the damages. And a lot of people felt off rip. That's a very high number. There was even a juror that had to be dismissed when they were trying to get the jury selection down because they were like, oh, I wouldn't feel comfortable awarding someone that much money.
Yeah.
That's a high number. So for me, my entire time, this is tragic. I'm thinking like, okay, definitely Zwerner's team is going to walk away with something, Zwerner and her team. I didn't think it would be 40 million, but when it's time for the verdict, I'm like, okay, this is the moment we're going to see everybody. I mean, like every day this courtroom was full.
Right.
And on the day the verdict was coming down, everybody was there. NBC, AP, everybody was there.
Right.
So I was like, okay, this is the moment we're going to see. And even in that moment, I'm like, this could literally go either way. Because you never know. You put yourself in the shoes of the juror and you're like, okay, what would I say? But you're like, that's what I would say. I don't know what.
And they still have to come to an agreement.
And this had to be unanimous. So they had to be all on the same page. So judge comes out. It's okay, the verdict, they've been reached. We've got to read it. The clerk, I believe, they read it. And they say, we, the jury, have pretty much found favor towards the plaintiff, and we assess her damages at $10 million.
What was her, what? How?
And you could just see, I mean, there was some,
chills.
Everybody's like, oh, okay, you still got some gas. You could tell some people were like, okay, it's maybe a little lower than I thought.
Yeah.
But it was still like quiet in there as they're reading everything. And so as soon as they get that done, you could even sort of see Abby and her team get fidgety and everything because they came out after and did a press conference. So they were trying to hear everything, process everything. Parker, at that point, her and her team, they were escorted out. And I felt like even then the sense was like, okay, this part is over, but there was still a lot of questions because we do have the criminal trial coming up.
So we have 30 seconds. Tell me what, I don't mean to put, but you know how it is.
I know how it is.
We got the criminal trial coming up.
November 17th.
How does the civil impact the criminal, or does it?
I feel like right now the civil could not impact the criminal. I feel like it's two separate things. However, there is still a possibility of the criminal getting thrown out. And in that case, it impacts it because who's going to pay this $10 million now? If this criminal trial is going to get thrown out, how does Abby get the $10 million? And that's what I think is still something to focus on as we are in that waiting period between civil just ended, criminal's about to pick back up.
And to be clear, this is not coming directly out of Parker's pocket. This is the school's insurance plan that's going to have to pay for this. So they might get dropped by their insurance company, to say the least. All right, Markeisha, thank you so much for joining us on this episode
for having
of
me,
Inside the
Superstar.
Investigation. We'll have you back after the criminal trial and we'll chat it up then. But thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you.
All right, bye, everyone.